Hello, 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 hello. Welcome everybody back to Truth Wanted Season 2, baby. We're back. And we're back faster than the government could be back. Seriously, we stopped, I think, around the same day the shutdown did. And we got back before them. So I think that's progress in some people's eyes. Yes, Season 2 is here. We're back. We're at a new time, obviously, at 7 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock Central. Hopefully, that'll get more of you guys to call in. This is a show where we talk to people about what they believe and why. Every single week, I try to bring in a guest host from the skeptic community or just religious communities in general. This week, I have a very, very, very special guest, someone who I'm a very big personal fan of. This is Uncle Mark from the How-to-Heretic podcast. Say hello, Uncle Mark.
What's going on, Dan? How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I am so glad you are here. And I wanted to ask first if you could just kind of introduce yourself a little bit, let people know just in case they don't know what the podcast is.
Yeah, totally. So I am I'm 1/3 of a podcast called the How-to-Heretic. And we are a post-religion or, I guess, leaving religion curious and / post-religion podcast about, various religious topics, but really what we aim, the audience we're kind of aiming this at are people who are just beginning this really crazy journey and that many of us have been on. So my podcast partners, Dan and Doug and myself, are all ex-Mormons who grew up in Salt Lake City. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's a cool religion. If anybody's interested, I can send a couple guys around your house probably in the next 20 minutes.
I've seen it around. I've seen quite a few bicycles around at least.
It's catching on. It's totally catching on. So that's our podcast, and we've been on the air for about a year, and we've been having a great time. And so anybody who's got particular Mormon questions or issues, I'm rarely qualified to talk about that stuff.
Yes. So just to emphasize, Uncle Mark is an ex-Mormon. So I would love it if we could have callers talking in about Mormonism or ex-Mormonism or those kinds of topics. But you are free to call in about any kind of topic you want, where we can either ask you questions about what you believe, or you can ask us questions about what we believe and how we got to those beliefs. The show phone number is on the screen, as you can see if you're watching at home. If you're listening to this from the podcast, obviously you don't have to worry about that, so don't worry. So Uncle Mark, your show also doesn't just cover ex-Mormon stuff. I mean, you guys talk about all kinds of things. I know I've listened to it myself. You've got essential oils. You're talking about religions from Eastern cultures and stuff. Recently, you were talking about circumcision, which was kind of cool. I mean, you guys really just run the gambit.
Yeah, totally. We try to, we try to put a critical eye on all of it. I mean, one of them is not really that much dumber or worse than the others as far as its kind of belief systems. Some are way more dangerous and toxic because of what they do in the world. But I think it's really good for people who are beginning their journey out and want to begin to learn how to think critically, to do kind of comparative religion stuff, right? To go, hey, let's talk about the Moonies. Let's talk about the Church of God with Signs Following, the snake handlers. And I think it's fun and it's kind of funny, but it also really helps people kind of triangulate where their faith is in a constellation of ideas, right?
Absolutely.
And they're all just nice. Ideas are something you should be completely unafraid to discuss and look at critically.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. This is, again, a show about talking about ideas, and I love what you guys do with your show in the sense that you're always willing to talk about stuff with an open mind for the most part. I mean, you crack some jokes, right? I mean, some of this stuff is pretty silly, but you're always willing to give something the best case. And I think that's what all of us should really strive to do. We should say, hey, let's look at this with a good faith in mind, right? And see what we can come up with, see what we agree with, see what we disagree with, and see how we reach our conclusions, which is really great. I'm sorry, I'm cracking up over here because I'm looking at the picture that we've chosen for you to represent as your avatar, I suppose. For the audio listeners at home, they're not going to be able to see it, but maybe you can shed some light on why we picked this image here, what it is.
Well, I wish they wouldn't be so cruel. I have a glandular problem, right? It's all my endocrine system, and I feel most comfortable on this stick. So stop it, haters.
Yeah, it's. I gotta say, you're looking very good for someone your age.
Thank you.
You know, it's. I've definitely seen worse, right?
I should talk a little bit about my avatar there. So this is, I think, in episode 9 of our show. Uncle Doug, who was a Mormon missionary, he was the only one of us that actually went on a Mormon mission. He did an examination of the Old Testament book of Leviticus, which is pretty hilarious. But buried in Leviticus, and I didn't know this was in it, is a prohibition against eating weasels.
Yeah.
And so the fact that the word weasel was in the Bible for some reason just broke my brain. I laughed so hard. And then the weasel kind of became part of our little show culture until we ended up buying this little creature off of eBay. And a very kind listener, he's not wearing it right now because it's Casual Friday, but a listener made him a Pope hat. So he's now Pope Leviticus the Forbidden. So he'll be standing in for me tonight.
Pope Leviticus the Forbidden. I love it.
Yes.
It's so good. It's so good. I didn't realize when you first sent me that image to use, I forgotten that that's an actual weasel that you own in your house.
Yeah.
That's somewhere that you put publicly, I imagine, which, good for you.
It's in our studio.
Yeah.
It's amazing what's available on eBay. I'm telling you.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. We were, we were talking a little bit before the show, and we were kind of talking about something interesting because for those of you who watch the show, I've had Bryce Blakenagel on, and I've made some appearances on some other ex-Mormon shows as well, and I've had conversations with other ex-Mormons, and I've come to this realization that, ex-Mormon culture and atheist culture, I guess, if you want to use those terms, are kind of different in a lot of ways, and they don't always actually mix. And like, for example, there's a lot of ex-Mormon podcasts for some reason. I don't know what it is, but you guys, you run the podcast business pretty well. Oh, hello. I think we lost audio there for a second. Well, it's just me talking right now. Let me go ahead and make some announcements real quick while we're waiting for Uncle Mark to come back. So we have the Valentine's Day Secular Sexuality Show that's coming up with a live concert with Shelley Siegel. It's going to be at the Chateau Bellevue, and the tickets are $30, which can be purchased in the link below in the show notes. This is going to be really, really awesome, guys. You guys should check this out. Yeah, there's an image on screen for those who are watching at home. It's going to be really, really cool. I think if you've looked on the Google Maps or you look up the venue, you can see like a 3D image of the inside. Guys, it's so cool. And plus, we're going to have food, we're going to have drinks, and live music for $30 in Austin, man. I mean, you can't beat that. Yeah. That's just going to be really cool. So definitely check that out. And also, our January edition of the Thinking Aloud newsletter is out, and it's going to focus on atheists and foxholes. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen our newsletter before. It's really interesting. I was in last month's newsletter. I wrote a little piece on Christmas and stuff. So definitely check that out. Hey, Mark, are you there?
I'm back. I don't know what happened. I think it was the Mormons.
It was the Mormons. They're trying to shut us down.
Yeah.
The LDS Church is hacking our systems.
They're always up to something.
That's so funny. But I think you're commenting on a point I was making about the Mormon podcasters, right?
Yeah. So, Mormonism, pardon me, is so it consumes such an enormous part of your life, in time and energy, in just busy work. Certainly, tithing money is a part of it, but really, it's such an all-consuming culture and religious philosophy that I was reading a statistic the other day that generally when your average American leaves a religion, they have like a 40 to 50% chance of ending up in another one for a time. Mm-hmm. And among Utah Mormons, that's 8%. So Mormons are really good at making babies.
Yes.
and making atheists, apparently. So
the two greatest exports of Utah.
What's that?
It's the two greatest exports of Utah, making babies and atheists.
And now Mitt Romney. Sorry, everybody. But I think that in Mormonism, the general term, I don't know if it applies to other religions too, is we call it people's shelf breaks. Right? It just falls apart. And then once that happens, it's really this incredibly rapid cascade of seeing that the truth claims are not supportable, seeing that the history is not what it was presented to be. And Mormons have this very missionary sensibility, right? They have this very missionary zeal.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people kind of take all of that rich stew of reality and oftentimes want to be kind of missionaries about it. So that's why there's Bryce Blankenagel and my pod partner has another podcast called Thank God I'm Atheist, which is a pretty big show. So I think, I don't know, we have a lot to say, I guess, as ex-Mormons.
Yeah, just want to remind people who are watching, our lines are open. Please call us at 512-686-0279, and you can talk to us live here, Objectively Dan, with Uncle Mark from How-to-Heretic. It's really, really cool, guys. But yeah, just to kind of add on to that, in kind of my background, I grew up, I'm going to say quasi-Methodist, quasi-Baptist. It was kind of weird. I eventually joined an evangelical college ministry, as a lot of people know with my story, and I did feel a kind of zeal after I was sort of deconverting. And also, there was a process too. Like, I kind of went from more conservative Christian to more liberal Christian before I completely stepped out, which, as you obviously know, that can be two different religions within itself, depending on who you're talking to. And there's definitely something to be said about the sort of, angry atheist phase that people kind of bring about, people wanting to talk to others about their atheism in some way. And it's kind of a different world when you're coming from an evangelical perspective to an atheist perspective than probably from like a Mormon perspective to an atheist perspective, especially since you have a lot more cultural ties when you're a Mormon. There's so many more things you can relate to with other people. We were even joking about this on Twitter. There's a lot of deep cuts to Mormonism that can be inaccessible to some people. And I understand why there's kind of this whole little group that kind of keeps to themselves and doesn't fully coalesce with everybody else. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's like going, I would imperfectly compare it to being the veteran of a war, right? You've gone through some completely alien, very bizarre, singular experience, and then you come back. And the only other people that really understand you are that select few that went through a similar experience as you. So it's because Mormonism is a lot of people would argue it's not Christian. I don't know what the difference is. What they say, they believe in Christ. What's the problem? Like, of course they're Christians. That's the blood test, as far as I'm concerned, for knowing if a person is a Christian or not. Right? They say it. But they have all these other layers on top of it. The Book of Mormon is this really strange attempt that Joseph Smith made to add a third testament to the Bible about Jesus in Central America, preaching to the Incans and the Aztecs, who were actually Jews. It's a crazy story. So not everybody knows that and gets it, So it makes Mormons, they call themselves a peculiar people. And it definitely makes them a peculiar people. And it makes ex-Mormons kind of, not everybody really understands you, you know, especially when you're new to it. And it's like you were saying about being an angry atheist or an angry ex-person. I think it's very common in Mormonism to, when you're leaving, I'm sure it's common in other religions, but certainly in Mormonism, when you're leaving, to really experience a tremendous amount of anger.
Yes.
That maybe the people who were responsible for your well-being as a child, your upbringing, didn't do their due diligence, right?
Yes.
So I think all of us, and this is what our podcast hopes to kind of talk about too, is we're all on a journey. And, you I watched that video with you when you were being kind of, approached in street epistemology. And yes, that was a different you, but you weren't an idiot, right?
Yeah.
You were making sense out of the world in the way that you were taught, or that you knew how, and you thought you had certain answers. And later it turned out that maybe that wasn't exactly the case. But you weren't stupid.
Yeah.
And then you went on a journey, like you said, you became a more liberal Christian, and then eventually you left. Right. And so I think it's, have you seen the Book of Mormon musical?
I've listened to the soundtrack. I've never actually seen the show myself.
I mean, it's quite brilliant, especially from, Matt and Trey, who are not Mormons. But they really hit the Mormon amygdala in really interesting ways. Like, they found the essence of what it meant to be Mormon, and kind of brilliantly. But they said a great thing that I think informs the work we do on our show, which is, when they were writing the musical, they said, we wanted to be absolutely brutal to the church and completely tender to the guys. So it was, yes, they were going to mock Mormonism and talk about its absurdities, and its, in the song where he talks about he's going to get his own planet. Those are all things they believe, but they were pretty sweet to these earnest young men who think they're doing some critical work, right?
Yes. And
I think that's important for us as a community to understand and to think about.
Yeah, and I'll be willing to say this about myself. I was indoctrinated into my religion.
Sure.
There was a lot of factors that were in my control, but a lot of them that weren't exactly in my control and out of my control. And I really like analyzing like the socioeconomic ties we can look into as to why people believe in certain beliefs that they do, and how that can affect the cognitive capabilities of some people, especially if they're living in areas where they're not able to have food on the table every single day. And so having a belief kind of helps them as a social structure in some way, and how that can inform their beliefs. I mean, there's so many lenses that you can look at it. And if you are looking at it from the binary of, well, religious people are stupid, and if you believe this, then you're dumb, and if you don't, then you're smart, then it's not nuanced enough to really have a really great conversation about this. There's a lot of factors. As much as we sometimes try to simplify it, there's just so many factors to consider. And like I said, what you guys are doing with the show is great. I think it's reaching a lot of other ex-Mormons. Obviously, you guys have quite a bit of a fan base, and hopefully some of those ex-Mormons are going to call today. It looks like we have a few calls on the line right now. Are you ready to talk to some people today, Uncle Mark?
I wasn't told I had to talk to anybody.
Well, you came to the wrong place.
I'll do it. I'll put on my missionary, I'll get on my bicycle and do my best.
All right. I'm excited for that. If I could see pictures of that, if we had a picture of you on the bicycle, I'd like to replace that with the weasel. I think that'd be cool.
I didn't do the mission, but I'm ready now.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump right into it. This is our first call coming from Boyd K. Packer. My contacts are blurring up on me here. He wants to talk to us about belief in the church and the way that they view sexuality. Boyd, are you there?
Yes, this is Boyd K. Packer.
Hello. How are you doing today?
I am quite well. I was resurrected from the grave this morning, so it's been a little bit of an odd day.
Oh, okay. Well, that's kind of interesting. Yeah. Let's see. I think we lost Uncle Mark here in a second. I'm going to try to get him back on. So anyway, tell me more about this belief that you have. I'm assuming you're joking. I'm hoping you're joking. I'm not sure if I know you. Maybe you know Uncle Mark. Is that what's going on?
Well, I hear things coming from Mark, and I don't necessarily agree with them.
Wait a minute. Hold on. I recognize that voice. That's Bryce Blankenagel, isn't it?
This is the reanimated corpse of Boyd K. Packer. I don't know who this blanker flopping person.
You can't do these Mormon deep cuts on me, okay? I won't catch on to it, and you make me feel foolish. I don't like it. Bryce.
Hey, this is Mark. I just tied to Kolob in the twinkling of an eye, but I'm back. I missed the whole first part of that conversation.
Well, Boyd K. Packer is here, and he wants to talk to you, and he's come back from the grave.
Oh, geez. Hey there, Boyd?
Is he there? Oh, shoot. We're having some issues on this line tonight. Really sorry about this, folks. Hopefully, Boyd K. Packer can come back and call again. I really hope that happens because that was really interesting.
That guy's a real piece of work, and he's dead. So if he can call in at all, that's amazing.
Yep, that's for sure. Okay, so now we're going to go to Kyle in California. And Kyle is going to talk to us about gender identity and pronouns and wants to explore his beliefs on that. Kyle, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, this is Kyle.
Hey, Kyle, how's it going?
Great.
Okay, cool. Well, I have this thing here. You're saying you wanted to talk to us about gender pronouns and stuff. What's up with that?
Well, I was just watching something over on Mr. Atheist not too long ago, and I've been hearing a lot about the proposed pronouns for like thee and they and so on and so forth. Now, I'm a longtime atheist. I don't have any religious beliefs, but I don't really buy into a lot of this gender identity.
You don't buy into a lot of the gender identity, like pronouns and stuff, like people identifying as different pronouns?
Well, the way that I see it is really that people are different. I take people for who they are. I don't judge people. I don't really feel the need to put labels or invent labels to determine who a person is, if that makes sense. So I think the example that I used, being race, most people would look at me and say that I'm white, but I'm also a 64th Cherokee. So do I need to come up with a new label to identify me as not white, but something else?
So you're saying you're not... go on, Uncle Bart.
It seems like a preposterous idea.
Can I ask a question? I'm a 50-year-old guy. Can I ask what your demographic is, your age group?
I'm a few years older than you.
Right. So I think I would posit that part of this is generational for us, right? And I think as the arc of other people having the right to feel included in society as themselves curves very quickly, it is harder and harder for people in our age group, and certainly people older than us, the so-called greatest generation, boomers, etc. I think it's really hard to see society change that quickly, and I think that's just human nature. Personally, I come from a place where, I was a gay person, a gay kid that was stuck in an incredibly homophobic, violently homophobic environment, not only in my religious community, but in my house where I grew up, in my home. And so I had to hide who I was to stay alive. And, I'm a cisgendered, meaning I am happy with the sex I was assigned at birth. I'm a man, gay, white guy. And people don't always perceive me as a gay person when they first meet me. But it wasn't until my mid-20s that I was able to feel safe enough to speak the truth of who I was. So I have I have a lot of empathy and respect for people that are on whatever that journey is. So to me, I know it's a little strange for a lot of people, but for me, it would be like if you and I met and I said my name was Mark and you said, no, you're more of a Tom. Well, that just wouldn't make any sense, right? Mm-hmm. And it puts you in a position of deciding what I am and taking that away from me, which I think is, skeptics and non-religious people, whether we're a little right on the spectrum or left on the political spectrum, we wouldn't think of doing that, right?
Yeah, and I want to add on to this as well. I think, some people like take this and yes, like Jordan Peterson and some other people think that if we're using these gender pronouns, like we're somehow controlling people's speech and things like that. And I don't think that this is the case. I really think it's exactly like what Uncle Mark is saying. It's just trying to make people feel more comfortable with themselves and being open, and letting people know, like, hey, this is my experience. And this is how I identify with this experience of, being me and being life. And it would make me more comfortable if you acknowledge that as a point of interest, right? So, like, I mean, I don't always tell people that I'm an atheist, for example. I think that's kind of just a tidbit about me. I have a lot of other things going on in my life. But if I'm talking to somebody who was also ex-religious, for example, that label and the two of me and that other person are going to have a much deeper conversation, because there's a connection there that you can't really have as someone who either never grew up religious or is still religious and never left. And so using that label for me as atheist is a label of accepting myself for who I am, and letting other people know about my experiences, especially as an ex-religious person. So it totally makes sense to me why somebody would want to use these kinds of pronouns to help them navigate their experiences and give themselves kind of a sense of identity in the world,
Maybe it's because I grew up in California. It's a very, very accepting environment. Even though I am older, I never really grew up with gay being a sin or anything along those lines. It's like I really never cared who's doing what with who, as long as they're consenting. Mm-hmm. So, maybe somebody's experience in the Deep South is very different from mine. I'm not trying to assign pronouns to anybody. It's just very confusing to me. I mean, I have a hard time remembering somebody's name, let alone having to also memorize pronouns, and especially, a list of 30 pronouns or something along those lines.
I can see how it could be confusing. And I will say your intuition about what it's like in the South is pretty spot on. I think if, a couple of years ago, if I had told people what I'm doing right now, like having a show and having, a gay co-host and talking about atheism and stuff, I think I would be shunned and booed all the way from Dallas to Houston. But the world is becoming a little bit more open to these things now. And I will say that, like, I know you probably know a lot of people, probably a lot of transgender people. I don't think that you know enough people to where it's going to be hard enough to memorize a list for all of your friends and family. And I think that that's what really matters, right? The people who are in your lives the most, who you want to respect and you want to kind of validate them in some sense. I think if you really do have good relationships with them, to me, it seems like the most logical thing to do is to, be supportive in what they've decided to call themselves and what they have decided is best for them, what's best to label their experiences.
Yeah, and from my perspective, it's kind of the Thomas Jefferson quote that it neither breaks your leg nor picks your pocket, right? So it doesn't. And the other thing is, you don't actually have to use any of those pronouns. It's just how, if you want to respect the person who says to you, could you please refer to me as they or she or whatever? I get it's confusing. I am, struggling all the time to make sure I fully understand because I'm part of the queer spectrum. I'm always trying to make sure I'm understanding other people, under the rainbow flag. And so I have a lot of work to do there, but I'm determined that I'm going to do the best I can and respect people where they're at. And I honestly think you're not going to have you're never going to have to carry, pardon me, like a fish chart around with you with all the pronouns on it, right? Mm-hmm. The few times this will come up in your life, you can choose whether you want to respect that person's sense of themselves and how they want them to be known in the world, or you don't have to. I have a feeling if you're confronted with it, if you're already on our side of the fence as far as skepticism and atheism, you're going to probably pay the person the respect that they ask for, right?
I have not personally been presented with a situation, so I don't know that I would or not.
Right.
Again, I absolutely respect anybody's right to be, you be you. I'm fine. Right. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But then asking me to change my behavior and even my words,
I think they can ask, and anybody can ask you to do a thing, but it's up to you whether you want to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Asking doesn't force the outcome.
True. And maybe also being an atheist, I don't like being told what to do.
No, and nobody can tell you to do it. It's just a matter of how we all decide we're going to engage with each other's humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had a conversation kind of similar to this with somebody the other day. Like growing up as a teenager in Texas, I used the F word a lot, and I'm not talking about the F-U-C-K word. I'm talking about the other F word that has been used to describe gay people. And I had to eventually consciously make that choice to say, I am not going to use that word anymore. I will never call anybody that out of my own volition, because I understand that there's a baggage that comes with that word, and it's out of respect for the people that I love and care about who wouldn't want me to use that word, and in general don't want to see that word happen anymore. Am I controlling myself? Is there an outside force, like a social pressure, that's kind of convincing me to make that decision? Yes, absolutely. But there's also that idea of I want to love and respect the people that are closest to me in my life. And I know that there's a person in my mind that comes to mind if I say that word where that would offend. And to me, that gives me more of an impetus to kind of catch myself when I'm using these words. So you mentioned that you don't have anybody in your life maybe where this is the case. I think maybe, and I'm just speculating here, but I think maybe if you knew someone personally in your life who you deeply cared about and they asked you to do this for them, I think you might be able to understand why this would be important.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, and I just want to kind of differentiate between, and I'm a gay person, so I'm going to say it, the difference between using the word fag, which is a provocative pejorative, right? Mm-hmm. Which is nasty and terrible. And when you're using a pejorative, you have to examine your relationship to that word, right? But this is a little bit different. This isn't pointing to a stranger and saying you're a fag. This is somebody who's letting you know that, hey, this is the journey I'm on. My recognizing my full humanity is part of that. This is my name. This is my pronoun. I think that's different. I think that's someone asking you to be cool with them, and you can choose whether or not you want to be. Whereas if you use a pejorative like fag or the N-word or something, that's ugly in a really different way. But there is a similarity there about how we all police ourselves a little bit, right? If we want to be decent human beings and not, be chased off to live in the forest for the rest of our lives. We all don't say certain things to people. This is just kind of the inverse of that. It's deciding whether we're going to respect people where they're at, and I'm down with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm absolutely not. I don't use any terms in a derogatory, pejorative sense.
Sure.
And I think people are, well, am I really going to be causing harm if I call somebody who appears male he or him? I mean, even if they feel like...
Yes, I would say yes.
Only if you're doing it after they've let you know what they would like to be known as.
Yeah.
Right. It's completely common and completely human to not when you're meeting someone for the first time, or maybe their gender is not totally apparent to you, maybe they're androgynous or whatever, and you use the wrong pronoun. And if they correct you, then first of all, you're off the hook for getting it wrong the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Trans people, believe me, have an incredible, genderqueer people have an incredible well of patience for this.
I was going to mention that,
because this has happened to them their entire lives. Mm-hmm. But if you continue to misgender them, mm-hmm. or what's called dead naming, if you use the name of the person they were before they began their journey, that's pretty shitty. Mm-hmm. And as a skeptic and an atheist, I think you should be fully aware of how shitty that is.
Yes. And gender dysphoria is a real phenomenon, a real psychological phenomenon that happens to people. And that can be triggered when you're using people by a pronoun that they don't prefer to be called by. And I would consider anybody who deliberately uses a pronoun against somebody who they've explicitly asked not to be called harassment in all forms. Because that can definitely cause harm.
That becomes a pejorative, mm-hmm. right? It's basically saying, it's the equivalent of saying fag if someone says, I'm sorry, could you refer to me as she mm-hmm. rather than he? And if you don't respect that, then in my opinion, in my experience with, part of our show is we have these amazing listeners, and I get so much feedback from all the segments we do. And I've gotten a tremendous amount of feedback from the trans community, mm-hmm. And from people I know personally, and then listeners who tell me this kind of thing. That dead naming and misgendering is incredibly cruel to them. So again, you're off the hook if you didn't know and you just made an honest mistake, no problem. But once you now have that knowledge, it's up to you how you want to act on it. But the humanist perspective, I think it requires you to respect that. Yes. The few times it's going to happen for you, and it's not going to happen every day, right?
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Does that answer kind of your questions on why we feel the way that we do about this issue, Kyle?
No, I sort of understand why people feel that way, and maybe it's, again, different. Maybe it's a generational thing. To me, that seems extremely sensitive, maybe to an extreme, but that may be, a different environment that I grew up in, a different generation. But
and if I can jump in on that, and again, I'm 50, so we're probably pretty close in age. It's not that individuals are getting more sensitive. It's that society is getting less shitty and callous, right? With a few exceptions, like what's happening in the White House. We are.
Yeah, it seems like they're getting more.
These people have always existed. There have always been trans people. There have always been genderqueer people. There have always been asexual people. There's always been gay people. When someone, an older person says, well, I never knew a gay person. You absolutely did. They just, their life depended on you on society not knowing they were gay.
Yeah.
It's 4 times that for trans people, right? So we're just, and I credit our millennial generation. I'm Gen X, obviously we're the best generation, but I credit our millennial friends for pushing this in a direction where we're being less callous and thoughtless to vulnerable people. And sure, it's sensitive, but what's wrong with being sensitive?
Interesting point to leave on. Well, Kyle, I love that you called about this topic. I think it's an important topic. I think we do have to move on to some of our other callers. But if you want to talk about this more, I'm sure the atheist community of Austin's Discord server has some people on there who would totally chat with you about this more. Does that sound good, Kyle?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. You've given me something to think about.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So glad that you called. I hope you have a great day.
Take care.
You too.
Yeah, really fun stuff. We've talked a little bit about trans issues and gay rights issues on Truth Wanted. We haven't gone that in depth on trans issues and the pronouns thing. I'm so glad that you feel the same way that I do, Mark, that it's just a level of respect thing for me now. I was on the same boat as Kyle, where it was really hard for me to understand at first. But I also know that I grew up very privileged in some sense. I'm a straight white dude. Came from a middle-class background, and that's going to shield me from a lot of these experiences that trans people have had with dealing with gender dysphoria and all kinds of the other things that happen. And so I can understand why they would want their experiences and their identity to be respected in that way. And I don't see it as that big of an extreme.
I don't either. I don't either at all. I think it's literally like if I tell you what my name is and then you decide to call me by something else, I'm like, well, that guy's a fucking crazy person. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And listen, the person's humanity is not predicated on your ability or inability to understand it.
Yes. Absolutely. Right? Yeah.
And if you don't understand it, educate yourself.
Yes, that's true too. There's always more you can learn about people's point of view and how people got to the way they are. Well, I'm glad because Boyd K. Packer has actually called back even after those technical difficulties. So we're getting Boyd back on here. Boyd, you're live on Truth Wanted. Go ahead and say what you were saying earlier because I think Mark missed some of that.
Yes, I'm glad that I got to see more of your film here because I understand the blasphemy that is said by this community of Austin and this Mark person on the call. He's really starting to grind against my feathers.
Well, I hope I'm not disturbing your little factory, Elder Packer. It's good to hear you from beyond the grave.
Well, it's good to be partially reanimated. Of course, I just have use of my head and vocal cords. Other than that, it's been a very, very trying day for me. Whoever practiced this black magic is, they're going to hell where they belong.
I think it's black magic that you're calling us on the line right now. Honestly, I don't know how you're doing that. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know how you kids deal with these screens and things. It's not what God would want.
Well, I was expecting more of a lag from Kolob this time of day, so it's wonderful to hear that we're connected by the miracle of I guess the Liahona.
Well, you see here, I'm so glad that you speak of Kolob because I happen to have a better idea of God's will than you do.
Of course, Elder Packer.
Here, I have been hearing so much blasphemy on this phone call, and I keep hearing that this Mark person is a homosexual. And that is just utterly perverse. And what happened to you, Mark? Who hurt you in the church?
Oh my God.
Well, I've got to say, Elder Packer, I know that I probably think about penises a lot, but I dare say in your 600 years on Earth, you thought about penises a lot more than I did.
That you have no evidence to prove that. See, you are clearly within the grasp of the adversary, and it is because you have viewed too much pornography and you're addicted to homosexual and perverse pornography, and that makes you think that you're something that you're not.
I can't do this anymore. I'm quitting the show. This is too much.
Well,
this is too much. This is the call that broke me.
Convincing conversation we're having, Elder Packer. You really have brought up some amazing points.
Yeah, it's such deep nuance.
If you would have gone on a mission, I would really hope that your mission companion would have set you straight if you ever came up to him.
The old punch in the face gay reset, which was you highly recommended, didn't you, in your life, Elder Packer?
Yeah, it clearly worked for me multiple times.
See, there it is, folks. Those Mormon deep cuts. It's there. It's there for the taking if you know it.
I don't think any non-ex-Mormons are listening to the show anymore.
I think that anybody who claims to be ex-Mormon has just let go of the long and hard iron rod, and they
grabbing onto an iron rod is the last of Mark's problems, I think. Yeah.
I don't know how you can even say such a thing.
Well, next, I'll take your advice. And next time the evil spirit moves me, I will tie my hand to the bedpost or think of my grandmother's face. So,
that yes, that and definitely not your grandfather's face.
no, thank you. Excellent advice. Do you guys have an ability to hang up a call?
We do have the ability to hang up a call. I'm wondering if Boyd would like to reveal his true identity, if he had anything else to say before we moved on.
Hey, guys, are you there? I put him down. I put him down again. He's gone. He will hopefully never bother this realm ever again. I'm so sorry to bother you guys with that.
Good.
Bryce,
that will never happen again.
Did your countenance become that of Elder Packer while you were standing at the podium?
Yes, it was very. I went Abinadi, and my face was shining. I didn't like it, and I'll never try that kind of spell again. That's some deep Joseph Smith kind of magic that I don't even think he ever mastered. That's not good.
I hope that never happens to you again, Bryce.
Likewise. Take care, gentlemen. I hope the rest of your program is fantastic.
All right.
All right. Put your shoulder to the wheel.
Have a great day, Bryce.
Bye.
Oh, man. That was Bryce Blakenagle from the Naked Mormonism podcast. For those of you who are out of the loop.
Let me just say to anybody in the Mormons, not in the Mormon spectrum out there, Boyd K. Packer was one of the 12 apostles. So one of the Power 13 of the Mormon Church. And he was a lifelong obsessive about boys masturbating. That was his whole thing. And punching gay guys in the face on your mission. So, super good guy.
Right on. Yeah, I too think about boys masturbating and preach on it often. I think it's something that we definitely need to talk about a lot more in our society. For sure.
If you talk about it all day, every day, then the police should probably look into it.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, we're going to go to our next caller here. This is Chase, who is in Utah. He is also an ex-Mormon and says he just wants to talk about his getting out of the LDS church. Chase, you are live on Truth Wanted. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm just having a good day.
Chase.
It's been really fun.
Hello, wait, who's that?
This is.
I feel like I'm talking to like three people at once all of a sudden.
This is ObjectivelyDan with Truth Wanted, and you are here live with me in the studio and Uncle Mark from a mysterious mountain base in Utah somewhere, I assume.
Yes.
I am also coming from a mysterious mountain base somewhere in Utah.
Oh, interesting. Is that like a little club up there that you guys do, or?
There's two mountain bases.
Two mountain bases. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. So tell us, Chase, what did you want to talk to us about? Sounds like you had an interesting story to tell, maybe.
Yeah. So, I mean, I like you said, I'm coming from Utah. I'm an ex-Mormon. I was raised Mormon. I served the mission. Went through all the secret temple ceremonies, wore the secret underwear and everything.
Cool.
And so,
I too wear secret underwear, by the way, but it's not Mormon underwear. It's something else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, would your underwear stop a bullet?
I haven't tried it yet, but I'd be willing. Let's get that live. Mark, let's set that up next week. Let's shoot the underwear.
Sure.
I can't say I'd recommend it, but I'm sure it would go viral to some extent.
Yeah. So tell us more about this story you wanted to tell us.
I just wanted to sort of analyze some of. I feel like the Mormon Church uses a lot of tactics to keep members in. They're a very community-based church, and as someone who's gone through the process of leaving, and I'm sure Mark can sympathize with this, and I am coming into the show sort of late, so maybe talked about your experience a bit more than what I'm aware of, but. It can be a very isolating and lonely process getting out when your entire social community is tied to the church, when your family is, going to start thinking of you differently. And, when people start telling you you're crazy because you don't believe it anymore, it can be a very painful process. And it's one that I know actually drives a lot of people to stay, even though they don't believe it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Was that your experience, Chase?
Yeah, it was. And I I sat in the closet for a couple of years before I felt like I was in a position where I could leave. And, now that I'm finally out and have been able to invest some time into learning how to be a normal person, life is way better than it was before, but it is a difficult process to go through.
I think that I've had this conversation on our podcast and on some different ones as well. And we were talking about it on cognitive dissonance one night. And for a lot of people that come from the Christmas Catholic world, or I was Christian, but it wasn't that big a deal. I think it's very hard for them to understand the totality of control and experience that someone like a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness or a Scientologist lives with, right? It fills up every minute of your day. And Chase, you probably came from the 3-hour church, and then there was the fireside in the evening. And when I was a kid, there was an activity almost every weeknight. And there was seminary, which is 1 hour of Mormon church during the school day. And a lot of Mormon families had an hour of scripture reading and prayer before school in addition to that. So it so consumes your time and energy that when you decide you have to leave, that's all gone. And generally, and oftentimes, a lot of, like you're saying, a lot of your community goes with it, right? A lot of us are completely estranged from our families or portions of our families. So it's a freaky time, right? To come out of it and then find your feet.
So, and I will add on to this as well, because I didn't come from a Mormon background, but I did come from a Christian background. And I took it very seriously. It's so scary, and you feel so alone. And one, I never thought I'd be speaking out on shows like this, but I didn't know that I could talk to anybody about this stuff. I wasn't fully aware that there was as such a big and vibrant community as kind of these ex-religious communities are, and how my experiences just felt so validated after I talked about it with some other people. For me, I lost a narrative in my life. I thought that I was, going to be protected by God. I thought God had a purpose for me. I thought that even though I didn't know what things were going on right now, that there was going to be a plan. And when I dropped that, it was like, well, shit. Now I have to figure things out for myself. And that's really different. And suddenly the kid who thought he was going to serve, doing mission trips and some sort of service work through the church has to figure out a whole new career path, has to figure out a whole new way of doing life, a whole new way of interacting with people, a whole new way of picking spouses, a whole new way of doing everything. And that's really, really hard. And unfortunately, we don't have as many institutions in our society as we should to kind of help with those experiences. There definitely are organizations like the Freedom from Religion Foundation and others that are doing really great work on that front, but it's really, really hard, Yeah,
so talk a little bit more about your, what that intermediate time was like, Chase, when you decided you couldn't be there anymore, and then, before you found your way out to the daylight.
So let's see, I was dating a girl at the time that was Mormon, and, we really liked each other. It was a really good relationship until this happened. And so, during that period of time, it sort of turned into this thing where everybody in my family knew what was going on, but they didn't want to talk to me directly about it. They just sort of gossiped amongst themselves, and it turned
very
into
Mormon, yes.
Oh, he just wants to sin. He's clearly looking at pornography, all those things,
Right.
That rather than confront that, I actually had reasons for doing what I wanted to do. And, it ended up reaching a point where, my girlfriend's parents told her that, they were considering not letting her visit them anymore because they were concerned about the influence that she would have on her little sister, and then, she was trying to convince me that I needed to go get mental help somewhere because, clearly someone who doesn't believe in God can't be a mentally sane person, and all these things. Eventually I just had to end all of that, move into a new apartment because, my roommates were Mormon and thus were in the same congregation and would never stop putting on that pressure. And so it was a transition through everything. I'm a student right now, and I was just starting out as a freshman at the time. And, I had to suddenly become financially independent because, my parents, if they were helping support me at all, would use that to control me to some extent and say, oh, well, we can't pay for your insurance or your tuition if you're not going to, do what we tell you to and go to church and whatnot.
Right.
And so, it lasted about a year or so. And I'm glad that, I was sure enough of my decision in order to stick through it. Eventually I was able to start networking my way into some communities and start meeting people who had been through the same things I had been through. Once I started looking online, it really helped a lot. And I feel like the internet, that's one way that the internet has sort of helped spike this decline in the Mormon Church that's happened over the last decade or so. I mean, it's not just that information is more available, which is clearly a problem for them, but also that this ex-Mormon community is more available as well. If you were to try and look in your neighborhood, it would be difficult to walk around all the neighbors and be like, hey, have you been through this or whatever? You can't just do that. Mm-hmm. But, you can find groups online. There's the ex-Mormon subreddit, all these resources that are suddenly available to sort of lend support, even if it's just in the form of somebody who agrees with your point of view.
Absolutely. And I don't know if this is available in your location, but the Secular Student Alliance really helped me out because I lost my faith when I was in college. Mm-hmm. And I had to travel to another school for their school's Secular Student Alliance because we didn't have one where I was at. But it was so worth it going there and meeting every week and talking to people in real life about these things that are just always on your mind and that you always notice. And you're right, it's such a good feeling just talking to people. I know online is great too, but like there's nothing that beats just having a drink with somebody and talking about the shit you used to believe and the shit you used to do, you know?
Yeah. and that's actually where I ended up. After searching online, I was finally able to find some people in my area. And it got to a point where I helped start and grow the Secular Student Alliance.
Oh, yes.
The chapter of the Secular Student Alliance at my university.
Oh, awesome. That is so good.
And
are you going to the SSA conference?
100 members.
Are you going to the SSA conference this year? Because I might be going. We should hang out if you're there.
I went the last 2 years. I'm planning on going this year.
You were there last year?
In LA. It's going to be a blast.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you met me.
Yeah. Okay. That might have happened because I did speak.
We were speaking at the same time, I think.
Oh, okay. That's what it was. Yeah, because I had a talk about street epistemology at last year's Secular Student Alliance. That was before Truth Wanted actually started. So that's really cool. I didn't know that you were there. Oh, okay. Well, now we definitely have to hang out if we do that. Well, I'm so glad that you're...
I think you would recognize my face.
Okay.
I'm the one who gave the talk with Martha. We co-hosted
Oh, yes.
sessions.
Okay, yes. Now I know. Yeah, Martha's awesome too. Yeah, I'm so glad that you found that organization helpful. It's such a great resource for me. I think Uncle Mark was about to say something here. And
No. I just wanted to do 2 quick points because we want to get some more callers on, I imagine. But, Chase, you were talking about all the, people talking behind your back. You were losing financial backing from your family. You were told to seek mental health. These are all coercions, right? They seem like those all seem like different things going on, but they're all the same thing. And they're all a coercion to force you to stay, because when people are very much into a high stakes religious faith, or they're suffering from kind of the sunk cost fallacy, and anybody else leaving threatens their belief. Your own family. We have this huge problem in Utah with LGBT kids that either run away or thrown out on the street, with youth suicide. It's all because of these insidious coercions. And then the second point, you were talking about finding community once you'd left faith because you were kind of on your own. I think part of what we do on the How-to-Heretic in our podcast is we try to bounce a message over the transom, because the internet, as you were saying, can do that. We can reach people that maybe couldn't find a community or couldn't find a voice to say, you're not crazy. And that's incredibly important to tell people, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a Baptist kid in the South, if you're a Mormon kid in rural Utah, You may not know anybody who isn't part of your faith, but you're doubting, so that makes you a crazy person. So to have some voice come over the internet and say, no, you're not crazy, that's super powerful. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, and that's I honestly feel like that's one of the biggest thing that is helping this type of change move forward. And I do feel like the Mormon Church is seeing it more than most other religions at this point. They seem
their truth claims are so extraordinary that when they begin to fall apart, it's kind of indefensible, right? The Bible, but the Mormons make some very, very bizarre claims, like Native Americans are all Jews, that sort of thing. So once science disproves that, you look beyond the veil. There's kind of no going back, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'll say this too. I'm sure it works the same way with the Mormon Church, but like the wildest stuff, like the Native Americans were Jews and some of those other things, like those are never expanded upon in regular meetings with people. Those are never the talking points. It's always the rest of it that goes on. And those are kind of like these kind of background details. So that's another thing too, because those are the kinds of things that go on in our heads. Meanwhile, everybody else is kind of thinking maybe the more general points, at least with Christianity, it's, how do we love our neighbors better and things like that. So there is kind of a dissonance in the thought processes of how they understand their religion, because I see it from a historical and socioeconomic standpoint and all these other things, and people just also see it as just they're just community, the friends that they hang out with and stuff. So it can almost be like you're talking to about a completely different subject sometimes with other people. So that's something to consider as well.
All right, we fixed all of Chase's problems. Yes. Let's move on to the next caller.
I was going to say, Chase, I'm glad that you did get to call in. I hope that it was also validating talking about your experiences here on Truth Wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was good talking to you. I look forward to seeing you at the next conference.
Yes, I plan on being there. I do plan on being there. And that's anybody else who's listening as well, the Secular Student Alliance Conference, which I believe is going to be in California this year, which is really, really cool. Yeah. All right. Thanks for calling, Chase. This was really, really awesome.
We'll see ya. Bye.
See you, man.
Yes, and I want to remind others as well that we still have some open lines if you want to get your call in. The number is 512-686-0279. Uncle Mark is here from the How-to-Heretic podcast, and he just wants to talk to us about really anything. He's willing to, he told me he was willing to talk about some crazy things. I was like, Uncle Mark, that's a little too much for this show. I had to calm him down a little bit.
Come on, people, bring it.
He was hyped up, but... anybody who wants to call about anything, we're here to talk, what you believe and why, we are down. But until we get some more callers, I would like to talk to George in Arizona. George wants to talk to us about circumcision, which is great. I don't know if you just heard, but the most recent How-to-Heretic episode was about circumcision. So hopefully it's fresh on Mark's brain. I know he's thinking about circumcision a lot generally. But
me and Boyd K. Packer, yes.
Yes. George, are you there with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. So kind of go ahead, Mark.
Hey, Mark. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi,
so
Dan.
Hey, George, how's it going? Kind of tell us a little bit more about what you wanted to go into specifically.
Well, I'm circumcised, and it wasn't a choice that I made, and I've asked my parents about it, and it wasn't something that was done for religious reasons or anything that I can tell. It was like an elective thing that was done. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure exactly why it was done, but they said it was done for health reasons, which isn't really apparent because I had no health reasons. It was that was the reasons why it was elective. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you want to talk about the reasons that I assume you're an American,
right? Yeah,
You were born in the States, but you're not Jewish or Muslim, which are typically the religions that circumcise. So I do happen to have, if I can just jump in here, Dan.
Mm-hmm, yeah, I wanted. This was when I saw this. I was like, oh, we have the circumcision expert on the line
God,
here.
Please don't say that. So I am
well,
objectively.
my knowledge.
Go ahead.
My knowledge of it is limited at best. So
we just did on our show. We just did a probably 40-minute segment on circumcision.
Wow.
And I'm objectively anti-circumcision in every case. So the reason that circumcision is in the Bible, the God of the Bible is very obsessed with the tip of men's penises, as much I guess as Boyd K. Packer, who called in a few minutes, is. But it was typically just Jews and who circumcised, and later Muslims. As we talked about on the show, there was an issue with Paul, where biblically circumcision is not Christian. So why do Americans typically circumcise their boys? And thank God, typically not their girls. The reason is there was this lunatic who you may have heard of in the 19th century by the name of Dr. Kellogg, who is the founder of cornflakes. He's the Kellogg's cornflakes guy, right? And he believed in eugenics. He thought that the white race was superior than the other races because of the way they packed rice grains into skulls and all that garbage science. But he also, the Victorians had this crazy obsession with stopping boys from masturbating. And Kellogg had this idea that circumcising boys, pubescent boys, unanesthetized, so they would feel the intense pain of the circumcision, would stop them from masturbating. And it's junk. It's not, obviously, I think any of us circumcised men out there can say it's not effective.
I'm going to say no on that one. Yeah, definitely not as effective.
And it caught on as there were all these crazy 19th century health crazes, and it caught on as part of that. So unless you tell your physician when your boy is born, you do not want it to happen, they generally have to ask permission, but most parents, this is the biggest moment of their lives. They've just, especially for the mothers, they've just pooped out this human being, and it's kind of an intense experience. And if the doctor you trust is saying to you, you should do this, it's probably a good idea, they do it to male babies without anesthetic, usually on the day they're born, and it is insanely barbaric and painful. Now, as far as health benefits, there are some not terribly useful studies that in certain parts of the world, under certain circumstances, it can lead to some better health outcomes.
Yeah, but this health thing is debatable.
It's not even debatable.
Yeah.
It's not. It's completely thrown out the window if you just practice decent hygiene and decent sexual, safe sex. It negates all of the quote unquote health factors of circumcision. So it's absolute bullshit. People should not circumcise their babies. It's too late for some of us. I need every inch I would have had, but it's too late. So that's why it happened to you, is a fucking crazy person.
I understand that. But if this wasn't done for religious reasons, I can't get any real answers from my parents. But if people are doing things like this to their babies for religious reasons, that wouldn't preclude anything like poking their eyes out or cutting their hands off or sewing their anuses shut or doing anything like that.
Look, it's like saying if you cut your feet off, you will never have a foot infection. That's an absurd proposition, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
right.
Tradition
makes.
I
guess we should all cut our babies' feet off then, right?
Yeah,
right.
Logically speaking.
One day you could have pancreatic cancer, so why not just remove it from your baby? That's an insane proposition.
Yeah. Tradition makes people do crazy things. They see the generation before them doing it, and they think that there's some sort of function or some sort of usefulness to doing it. And that's the reason why a lot of people who even aren't non-religious pray for different things, right? They don't even know what they're praying to sometimes. It's just kind of a force of habit. Human psychology is kind of weird like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's part. This is a great example of what being skeptical is. It's okay to question everything, right? And so when your baby is born with a foreskin, or your baby daughter is born with a clitoris, and somebody comes to you and says, "Well, what do we need to do? We need to cut that off." Think about it.
Right.
Why? Why do you need an aftermarket modification the day this thing is born? It's an absurd proposition, and it honestly should just be stopped completely.
Yeah, well, I agree.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Cool.
I think we're all on the same page on this issue. Circumcision, generally not a good idea. Surprisingly enough, most countries in the world, at least European countries and other places, aren't doing it. It's going less and less. The statistics I've seen within the United States is it's decreasing, but not nearly by much as it should be, which is just really interesting. I don't know. It's hard because it's what do we need to do? Do we need to make an anti-circumcision campaign, an anti-circumcision lobby?
People are absolutely doing that.
Yeah.
And basically all these things change by people like us having the conversation as much as possible. Don't talk about it every day because then you're a crazy person. But asking this question and examining the evidence behind it is how things change. So no more circumcision.
If more people knew about Kellogg and where this all originated from, they wouldn't do this, I think.
Right.
And then you have the religious aspect that's also part of it, and that is a big thing too. So,
but what's weird is the religious aspect is very, very minute in the United States, really. It's just my daddy did it, my granddaddy did it,
right.
My son's going to do it. It's that inertia of a bad idea that just caught on at the wrong moment.
Yes. I've been taught apologetics. I've been taught apologetics about circumcision and why, the Jewish people do it and how it's kind of there to culturally differentiate themselves from the people around them. But in the modern day, it just really doesn't make as much sense, especially since, we're not fucking Jewish. So there's that aspect to it as well.
I don't get it.
And it's just one of those traditions that you just do it once and then it's over with, and then you don't think about it until it gets brought up,
We don't walk around with our pants down around our ankles, right?
Yeah.
So how would you differentiate a Jew from a non-Jew?
It's one of those things
by
too.
Looking at his penis?
Yeah, that's weird. That's weird. I don't know why. That's what I was told. I guess
that is actually part of the religious history of circumcision, is that it was to differ because people, you were more likely to see a person's penis in the Iron Age because somebody might have one shitty tunic and they wash it once a year, and a lot of labor was performed nude. Right, so that was part of the differentiation that when, and it had to do with the Jews in Greece, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, great, but we've discarded a shit ton of those old bad ideas. This is one that needs to be discarded, and Jews should stop doing this too.
Slavery in the Bible was, happy, friendly, slavery plus back then, but now it's not.
Oh, that's a whole other topic, man.
Well, it was still slavery then, but thank God we don't live by the Old Testament.
Right, for sure.
So that's what I'm saying. There's a comparison between the things like people running around with loincloths where you can see their genitalia.
Right.
And this way you can tell who's a Jew and who's not.
Right.
Yeah.
To today's standards where no one runs around wearing a loincloth.
And based on the history of the 20th century, I don't think we should obsess on who's a Jew or who's not. I think we should just, people are people, leave your dicks alone. It's a better life.
Yeah, I agree.
I just don't get it. And I don't,
But that's why it happened to you, is because of that crazy industrialist in the 19th century. It's madness, but it's true. You can look it up on the internet, or you can listen to the last episode of the How-to-Heretic. We talked about it at gruesome length.
I'll listen to that.
Yes, you definitely should, George. I would say keep having conversations like this with other people. Keep bringing it up. Of course, when it's like socially not weird to talk about, penises and stuff, right?
Yeah, it's very hard to find a platform for that kind of discussion.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Trial and error. You'll figure it out.
Yeah. Well, thanks for calling into the show, George. This was an interesting conversation.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure.
George.
We still have lines open, by the way, if you guys want to call. We're kind of wrapping it up towards the end of the show, but we might be able to take one more call from 512-686-0279. That is the number. George said something interesting while we were talking there, and he said if more people knew about this fact that, this whole circumcision thing kind of was started from the Kellogg's guy, right? Like that was a part of that history, that if more people knew that, then we wouldn't do the things that we do. And that kind of reminded me of my own experiences of when I was first looking into the history of like the Bible, for example. And I found out that, the Gospels weren't actually written till at least like 40 years after the time of the events that they were described. And that was a fact that if I knew that at a much younger age, I can't imagine I would hold the beliefs as long as I did. It's just these little facts that we can kind of miss when we're growing up in these kinds of cultures that don't openly talk about these things.
Well, you're raised to take the things your elders tell you as gospel truth and for granted. And it takes a while and some maturity and some courage to, for your example, Dan, to look at the Gospels and go, they're a mess.
Yeah.
They don't agree with each other. We've done on the different resurrection stories in the Gospels, the different nativity stories in the Gospels. It's a complete disaster. They don't agree on anything. If you talk about that there is zero evidence for the book of Exodus, the stories in the book of Exodus having happened.
Yes.
That's kind of earth-shattering for a Bible-believing Christian when they come to that realization.
And I also realized, too, that I wasn't fully given that information. I think most people who grew up in those kinds of religious situations aren't. When you do a Bible study or when you go to a sermon, you're at most looking at like 5 verses maybe. And I just realized when I was kind of coming out how many of these books of the Bible I hadn't even personally read myself. I realized wow, there's this whole book that I just kind of believed was true and I didn't even look at it, And there's some people that say, well, you do the same thing with science textbooks, you believe them and stuff. It's like, well, I mean, it's not really the same thing there because there's a difference between the vetting processes, right? I know what some of the vetting processes they get into a science textbook, and the Bible vetting processes is a whole other thing that just, either didn't happen or was just really sketchily happened in some cases, And
there were vetting processes for the Bible. That there was the Nicene Council, and there were all these different decisions on what books to include, and the Apocrypha was thrown out, and but it for the individual experience of a Christian in America, and you're a child, here's the vetting process for the Bible. Here's your Bible. It's true. That's the entirety of it. And the adults in your life and authority figures you're taught to respect never tell you, there were votes on which books should go in and out. There was an attempt to keep Protestants and Catholics from killing each other that created a different version of the Bible. There's, you don't know that stuff until later, and then it calls it into question, which is good, but it's frightening.
Well, I wanted to ask you a question, Uncle Mark, as we're kind of going to the last few minutes of this show here. I thought maybe you could provide some expertise on this, maybe as kind of a different kind of topic than we don't normally cover, because you're more of an expert on this. Specifically going back to Mormonism and talking about how we should talk about Mormonism. I have people that come into the show and they want to talk about their experiences. I haven't particularly had a lot of Mormon callers per se, but of course Mormons are out there. In Texas, you don't see them as much, but in other places, Mormons are definitely there. Then they want to have conversations with you a lot of times if they're on mission and they want to, spread their word, and that's what they're called to do. If someone was to have a conversation with you about Mormonism, and you're a special case, right? Your story's a bit different from people, but let's say for the average Joe, and somebody wants to talk to them about Mormonism. I mean, do you handle it by a case-by-case basis? Do you have a method of breaking down? Because I know that you know what they like to talk about and what they want to emphasize. I mean, you could probably write a whole lot more about it, but I mean, just as a word of advice for people who want to have more of these kinds of conversations and who are interested in kind of bridging the divide, so to say.
So are you talking about if I were to talk to Mormon missionaries, or if I was just talking to a lay person?
I guess I would say because the average person doesn't really know as much about Mormonism. I mean, like, I don't know as much about Mormonism, but even I know more than the average person because I've studied this stuff. And most people, they just know the weird stuff. They know about like the polygamy and the multiple heavens and stuff. Like, I guess what I'm wondering is the missionary thing is interesting to me, but like, if I want other people to know about Mormons, I want other people to know about like Mormon beliefs in some way. Like, is there a way to talk about Mormonism that doesn't feel like threatening to Mormons? Is there a way that you've kind of?
No, there is not a way to talk about. There is not a way for a non-Mormon to talk about Mormonism that will not threaten a Mormon. They have a very bunker mentality, and they're lovely people. There's tons of really super nice Mormons out there. I live in Salt Lake City by choice. It's a great place to live, but some of them are not so nice. But the beliefs are. I always like to say, we'll look at a certain strange belief, like some cult. Mm-hmm. And it's wacky. They believe in flying saucers, and they believe in, parting the Red Sea, whatever. But at the end, I always try to bring it back to: is it any stranger than a virgin birth, meaning an unfertilized human being coming into that? It simply didn't happen. Is it any weirder than an immortal three-headed God that came to Earth to pretend that we could kill him, but then he ended up not being killable 3 days later, and then we eat him every Sunday? Those are absurdities to me. And so, yes, Mormonism has huge absurdities that way. So does Scientology. So does Judaism. So Mormonism is just it's all the same kind of crazy to me. Mm-hmm. It's just a different cultural version of it. It's a different color of that.
I can see that. I can see that
rainbow, right?
I look at, because I want to help people who are in those situations where they feel like they're in the closet and they want to come out and they want to talk about these things. But the way, like we were talking about earlier, there is a cultural divide there. And I want the average person to know about Mormonism so that they can know what they believe and why, in my opinion, I think Mormonism, as of many religions, is very dangerous for people to believe and causes a lot of harm. And it's hard to convince, kind of the average person of that in some way, maybe because they have religious beliefs of their own, but also because kind of the interest isn't there. Like I said, I know more about Mormonism now as an atheist than I ever did when I was a believer because I kind of just didn't care.
Right. Remember that when Mormonism was founded, and then the inventor of Mormonism was killed, mostly by a mob of his disaffected former followers, because he would dispatch the men on missions for 2-3 years. They would come home and find that he'd married their wives and or daughters. So when he was killed in Illinois, and the Mormons moved to what's now Utah, that was Mexican territory. So they were a radically anti-American, kind of millennialist, primitive Christian cult. That's kind of what is in their marrow, but that's not what most people know now.
Right.
This rebranding effort with people like Donnie and Marie and Steve Young and Mormons are these kind of scrubbed up, more American than Americans, Yankee Doodle yahoos. That's not really who they are at their core. But that's who they want. That's how they want to be seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was so interesting. Like when I was first discovering Bryce Blankenegle's podcast, for example, and Naked Mormonism, I had no idea they were Mormon missionaries that were like toughing the trails and like starting temples and burning down towns and killing lots of people and all this political intrigue and all this. I had the same idea like you just described. I just thought they were these white people that like to dress nice and I don't know, sit in church on Sundays like everybody else, except with a few extra weird beliefs, you know?
Right.
And it's so amazing how much a rebranding effort like you're talking about can affect the cultural image that we see. I think there's a lot of people right now that are looking at evangelical Christianity in particular and are kind of being more wary of it, especially with the current political climate. And I'm just wondering, like, will Mormonism, do you think, ever have that same kind of effect on people? Or do you think it's always just going to be internal affairs with them?
I think that the rebranding effort you were referring to would have been almost 100% successful if the internet hadn't happened. And they were on their way to completely reinventing themselves, to convincing the world that the kind of fringe Mormon polygamists that live out in the desert, hinterlands here, had nothing to do with them. They were right on the edge of that. And then the democratization of information came along, and they could no longer control a history that was incredibly complex and very damning. And so right in the middle of their rebranding effort, the internet exploded, and they've been kind of flailing ever since then. They have horrible race views from the 19th century. They have horrible misogynistic views. That doesn't make them unique among faith, certainly. But they tried to pretend that was never the case. Like Brigham Young, the second president of the church, the founder of the state of Utah, the things he said about Black people, and you can look them up or you can listen to some of our episodes, are they'll curl your toes. It is insane. Even by the racist mores of the day, they are so grotesque that it is crazy. And they tried to bury that, and now it's unburied. So I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
I think they're aging out. I think it's getting smaller and smaller, and I don't know.
I think about this with mainstream Christianity as well. I think about, like the gay rights movement and how our culture has accepted that into kind of mainstream views, right? And like I absolutely know for a fact, 50 years from now, as big as Christianity will be, and I have no idea how big it will, certainly smaller than it is today, I hope, or I wonder, maybe, is that the narrative is going to change to say that gay people have always been accepted in the church, or that, this was always what Jesus taught. People were just interpreting it wrong. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at documents from the 1960s and 50s when interracial marriage was becoming the hot topic, and how many Christians were on the other side of saying, this is biblical, this is the mark of Cain, this is, our beliefs are justified through these texts. If you look at why the Southern Baptists are the Southern Baptists, and why there's a break in the Baptist community because it was about slavery at some degree, right? Like, it's crazy to me how these narratives can just change within our lifetimes. And I think I'm already starting to see it, especially when I browse Reddit on like r/Christianity and other places, of how these narratives are changing of, suddenly we were always accepting, suddenly we were always these, quote unquote, good people that always believed in these principles, even though that's historically never been the case.
Right. Right. And, in Dr. King, with the Civil Rights Act was signed in, I think, 1964. Dr. King was killed in 1968. It took until 1978, a decade after Dr. King was killed, for Mormons under threat of losing their tax-exempt status. It's amazing what motivates prophecy. So under threat of losing their tax-exempt status, they finally decided that Black men, of course not women, could have the full access to Mormon priesthood that is given automatically to every white 12-year-old boy in the church. So, religion changes, but it changes 20, 30 years behind the times. And I don't think it changes fast enough to preserve itself. It may have to learn to do that if it wants to preserve itself. But the prognosis is not good, and I think that's good for humanity. I
think so, too. I think as far as the internet age is concerned, the atheists caught up way faster than the religious did, and it really shows now with how much progress has been made with online communities and the movements that have happened since the internet has started. And I think you're right. I think it's going to continually progress in a trend. We'll see if there's any bounce back from that, but I think that's about it for wrapping up for the show today that we can talk about. Uncle Mark, you've been a fantastic guest. I'm so glad that you got to be on. I hope that you can be on this show again.
I'd love to. I tried my best to ruin it, but apparently I didn't make it happen. So.
Well, it was more the callers. It was more Bryce, if anything, that ruined the show today.
Fucking Bryce.
As usual, right? Man, this was so great. I want to go ahead and plug myself first, and obviously I want to tell you how you can find Mark. But first, if you're new to this show and you're coming in from the How-to-Heretic, I'm Objectively Dan. Hi, this is Truth Wanted. We do this every week on Fridays at 7. You can find us right here on this YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe. And we have a Patreon as well. All the Patreon money goes to helping make this show happen and other ACA productions. I'm on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan, where you should definitely follow me there. I'm pretty active on there. And we have a Facebook group for Truth Wanted where you can find updates on the show and things like that. Mark, can you tell people where they want to find you at?
Absolutely. If they want to hear more of my horrid, nasally Utah accent voice, you can find our podcast at howtoheretic.com, or you can find us on Stitcher, iTunes, any of the pod blasters. And I'm fairly active on Twitter at How-to-Heretic, and we'd love to have you. Wherever you are in the kind of faith journey or faith spectrum, I think you might find something you like in our show, because we're assholes, but we don't act like it on podcasts. So
they're not assholes, guys. They're wonderful, wonderful people, and you need to check out their show. You really do. I can't recommend it enough. It is awesome. It is accessible. Whether you've been an atheist for a year or 10 years, I think you're really going to get something out of it. It has a little bit of something for everybody. And like I said, I'm so honored to have you on the show. I think
Honor's all mine.
Oh, thanks. That's going to wrap it up today for Truth Wanted, guys. This has been a really, really awesome first episode of Season 2. Next week, we are going to have probably my most requested co-host since the show has begun. It is Shannon Q from YouTube. I hear some people in the audience wooing. She is going to be on. We're probably going to talk about psychology and some other stuff that she's really into. And we're going to also have some big names coming up this year as well that I will probably announce at a later date. Be sure to keep following me on my social media and stuff. That about wraps it up for today, folks. Thanks again. And remember, always keep wanting the truth. We'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.